Hello and welcome back to the alternate media Tanakh series, studying with moi, Brad. Um, I didn't really prepare notes, kind of like last time. I really do intend for this Torah study to be a little more candid, to be a little bit more of myself, and just kind of give you my thoughts as they come, as I'm reading through the Torah. So I guess I hope it feels a little more organic, and I guess even almost like you're having a conversation with me, or at least engaged in the process of Torah study. Um, I am gonna incorporate something this time that I didn't think to incorporate last time. So I really do hope that you appreciate it, and I hope that it's actually a resource you will utilize also. But I am going to introduce you guys to Sepharia. So this is a phenomenal source for if you're looking for any kind of Judaic literature or commentary. Not all of it has been translated just yet. They're still in the process of translating some of it, but a lot of it has been translated. So here, you have access to the Tanakh. That's the Old Testament. The Mishnah, the Talmud, the Midrash, Halakha, some of Kabbalah, liturgy. More. There is so much here, but we will be studying the Tanakh, very specifically the Torah, and Genesis 1 we are still on. We left off last time on verse number 10, so we shall pick up this time at verse 11. Oh, come on, don't freeze on me. No! Okay. So, before we get into that, I do want to apologize for the last video, and I thought about redoing it, and God, honestly, I may still try and redo it. I know the sound quality was utterly terrible. I'm not sure what happened or why the sound recording went the way that it did, and I apologize for that so much. You guys have probably noticed I talk with my hands a lot. This is not just a camera nervous thing. This is actually how I talk in person. And I'm not Italian. I am half Cuban, so there's a little ethnic cause for speaking with hands. But just to recap a little bit of last time, because we're going to get into it almost immediately this time, is that I did mention the 10 words of creation, the 10 statements of "and God said," and whatever the creative statement was. Off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly how many there were. So there's one in verse 3. Yeah, one in verse 3, one in verse 6, so that's 2, and one in verse 9, so that's 3. So we've gotten 3 so far. So as we're working through Genesis, I do want you to pay attention that there are exactly 10 times that God says, that the text says, "and God said." Because I probably will be launching a separate study at some point, where because I've never done it before, and this is something that even my father has spoken about with me a little bit, is we call them the 10 words of creation. Additionally, the 10 commandments themselves are called the 10 words. And so I've just got this feeling that there is some level of correlation between the 10 commandments and the 10 words of creation. Where they pertain and relate to one another, I have no idea, but I just feel like that would be an enlightening study. So I probably will be doing a study on that, and possibly even seeing where maybe even the 10 plagues factor in there, because it's no coincidence that there are 10, that there are 10 commandments, that there are the 10 words of creation. So anyway, I guess to keep a tally, we do have exactly 3 so far in the book of Genesis. So I'm going to go ahead and tally mark 3. And I guess let's go ahead and start. Let's see. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on the earth, that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. So there is our fourth "and God said" statement right there in verse 11. Now, I one recap. Also, another point of recapping last week is that I think I made mention that after the statement of, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. After that statement, pretty much everything that was brought forth was already in existence. It just had to be, as I said, brought forth. It's not that it was necessarily created out of thin air, but the potential for it and the materials for it already existed within the conglomerate of created matter at this point. But remember, everything was in a state of disorganization, and so the rest of the narrative here, we're seeing it all organized and then therefore brought forth from the creation that is. And so that's what we're seeing here. We again see, I'll pull the page back up so you can read it, is that God says, "Let the earth sprout vegetation." Okay, so yes, let the earth bring forth vegetation. He's not creating plants where there were no plants. The potential for these plants already existed, and they are now being brought to fruition at this point. Let's see. Scrolling down to verse 12. "The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind, bearing fruit with seed in it, and God saw that it was good." All right. "And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day." So, wow, we're only on the third day. 10 whole verses in the last one, and that only covers 2 days. But here again, we also do see the precedence of evening and morning being a day. And just to restate that this is why the lunar calendar, which is the calendar which Israel functions on, everything begins in the evening. For instance, I actually just had a discussion recently about the probable time which Yeshua would have risen from the grave. And if we take the Gospels at their word, for the words that are actually in the text, because for those of you who have KJVs, it won't be in the digital versions, but if you have an actual copy of the KJV, it will be. In all 4 Gospels, their account of the resurrection, many of them will say, as the first, at the end of the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, or the Greek would more appropriately translate as "to draw on." The word "day" is not actually in the text. In your KJVs, it will be in italics, and that's important because the King James Version made sure to italicize anything that was a scribal note. And I've mentioned this a couple of times, that is the value that I do perceive in the KJV. Chief among all others is that it's at least intellectually honest with respect to, okay, this is actually in the text of the manuscripts that the Bible was translated from, and this is actually something that a translator added. And so you can actually distinguish between the two in the KJV. So the word "day" is not there. So it's where what the text would actually read is "first of the week." Well, the first of the week would be Saturday evening, because that would be the very beginning of Sunday. And so the Gospels actually more so lead one to the conclusion, if properly understood in a Semitic context, in the Judaic context, that Yeshua actually probably rose from the grave at sundown after the Sabbath, which makes sense again because he was done resting at this point. But anyway, let's go back to the text here. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years." So here we're at a point where we've already discussed earlier how light technically already existed. True light, but perhaps not necessarily physical light in the sense of visual light, what we can see with our eyes. And night and day were also established, but perhaps not in the sense that we would tend to typically think of. And then here we are now seeing physical representations for us to relate to the truth of what is. So like the lights that I have illuminating the studio right now, these are physical lights, and they help to correlate internally a truth of what true light actually is, which again, if you want to hear me talk a little bit more about what true light actually is, then I would encourage you to watch the first episode of this Tanakh study if you haven't yet. But that is what the heavenly bodies here are being established for. And if I'm not mistaken, let me see if the word that, yes. So this word here, let me see if I can highlight it. Yes, there. All right. This word here, which is highlighted, oh no, I've lost it. Okay, we're back. Okay, yes, this word which is highlighted, that is where in the text, oh no, I've got to move it down a little more just to kind of read and explain to you exactly what I'm trying to get at. So, where it says they shall be, or they shall serve as signs for the set times, the set times would be this word here, which would be, what does it look like? Moedim. Moedim is the set times or the appointed times. This is holidays. It is really how we in the 21st century vernacular would understand it. Which Moedim really would start with the mem. The mem. Let's see. Maybe nope. Okay, yes. This is the word Moedim. In it, just plain old Moedim without the prior letters, which have their own meaning on the text and kind of serve as it's more grammatic than anything else. Moedim still being appointed time or the set times as we see here, because moed, a moed is an appointment, and so we do see that the stars and the moon and sun and whatnot, they are for us to tell seasons, and when holidays will be coming about. So they are for the determining of months and days and years and whatnot. So let me actually collapse this, because we don't need that. Guys, actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and just kind of show you. So you see how I've kind of highlighted the whole verse here. if you do so choose to use this resource. One of the cool things about it, I'm really struggling with this here. Verse 14 is where we're at. Thank you. Okay. You can go up to where it says commentary, and you'll get several options of commentary. Rashi is one of the extremely popular ones, and so if you pull that up, you'll see where Rashi expounds on the statement, be there luminaries, or let there be luminaries, and he will explain his thoughts on that statement and how he interprets it. So this is a very intuitive tool to use for studying. But let's get back to the fullness of the text here. Verse 15, and they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth. And it was so. Okay. So they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky. Or they shall act as lights, or they shall be lights, or luminaries in the expanse of the sky. This, I'm sure probably Rashi has a fascinating bit of commentary on this statement, which it seems, to me, it seems a rather straightforward and simple statement. But this is exactly the kind of verse where it's likely that Rashi actually has something fantastic to say. So I would encourage you probably to look at that. Off the top of my head, I do not remember what it is. I have read through Rashi's commentary of Genesis, but it's been a little bit. So moving on to verse 16. God made the two great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, and the lesser to dominate the night, and the stars. So obviously we're talking here about the sun and the moon, and here we are given these so that we can determine the difference between night and day here, in the terms that we understand them in. But again, these concepts predate the creation of these lights that distinguish and separate them. And God said, and God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, to dominate the day and night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good. So the separation of light and darkness, God saw was good. Now, there's an important thing to think about here, and I may have touched on it a little bit in the last one. I don't really recall or remember, but darkness is not inherently negative, but the mingling of light and darkness, or in some thoughts, in some schools of thought within Judaism, darkness is actually understood to be what is called concealed light, and that would be some forms of darkness would be called concealed light, and that's because there's something to seek out. There's something to learn therein, and I think that's important kind of to draw out, because I feel like in the Western mind, in the English vernacular, the word darkness seems to come with an inherently negative connotation to most who read it. And it's almost treated in this narrative like the separation of light from darkness was the separation of good from evil, and that's just not the case, because God separated the light from darkness, and then he called them both good. And that's an important thing to understand, is that he did call both of them good. So, sure, you can use the word darkness to describe something that maybe is evil. We often describe macabre things as being dark, or Tim Burton movies have a darkness about them. And sure, I would tend to agree with that. But again, that's the limitation of the English language, whereas in the Hebrew language there are multiple words that would translate as darkness in English. And the darkness that we mean when we're describing Tim Burton movies, there's a specific Hebrew word for that, that always has that connotation, whereas there are other words that we would translate as darkness that don't carry that negative connotation. So it's an important thing to remember, an important thing to note about this passage, that the separation of light from darkness is called good, and in that also both light and darkness themselves are called good. And verse 19, there was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. All right. Let's see, getting around to verse 20. We kind of breezed through this one a little faster. But then again, I didn't mean for these to really be that lengthy of series here. Another thing I want you to notice about the passages at hand, and what we've read so far, is that the whole Bible opens with, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And so far what we have read is the account of the creation of heaven and also earth. We've seen the heavenly bodies created. Well, first and foremost, we've seen the principles created, the principles of night and day, the principles of light and dark. We've seen those. Those came to fruition first, and then their physical representations then later came. And so you have the creation of heaven and earth almost in terms of distinguishing two realms. One realm where principles are the rule, and then another here where they take physical form. And so you've got heaven and earth in that aspect, and then secondly, outside of that, you've also got the what we could refer to as heaven. A heaven here on earth, being the sky and the expanse of the sky, outer space, and what have you. You've got that being established, as well as the greenery being brought forth from the actual physical earth itself at this point. So there's almost multiple ways that the first initial statement is being brought to fruition in the rest of the narrative. But to return to the text here, God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." So this is important. I want all of you to take note right here and right now in Genesis chapter 1 when the earth is being created. Okay, because this is important. Because there are some inherent differences between Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, and a lot of people will point these out as contradictions, and they're only contradictions if you operate from the frame of mind that the earth and the Garden of Eden were in the same place. Now, I know I just dropped a big bomb on you guys, and I kind of gave a little bit away. Spoiler alert. But yeah, this is what we just read is only a contradiction with Genesis chapter 2 if you operate from the premise that the garden itself existed somewhere on the earth. Whereas what I'm going to kind of use the text here to outline and to prove as best I can, that the notion that Judaism has had for a long time, actually, is that the garden was actually a separate realm altogether. It was not located on the earth. And therefore, the things created therein were created differently. Because here in Genesis 1, we see that not only do the fish come from the water, but also the birds as well. We see where it clearly says swarms of living creatures. Oh man. There's a particular word that I'm looking for here. Swarms of living creatures. Anyway, the idea here being, so fish we know school, and they swim in schools, but also birds we say they flock, and they fly in a very similar pattern and a very similar formation type to what fish do in the water. And here we see an association with those two, in that both of them are coming from the water. And so they both are brought forth from the water, and it's almost funny. Fish have scales, birds have feathers, and they take on a very similar method of construction, shall we say. And I know evolutionists like to try and take this point of demonstrating that, well, yes, this is how we know that dinosaurs may have evolved into birds, is because scales and feathers and the way of their construction. Now, this doesn't necessarily mention reptiles here, which is also interesting. It just mentions fish and birds, or at least that's what we're meant to derive from the text, because reptiles don't exactly swarm or flock the same way that birds and fish do. Anyway, I personally do not align with evolutionary theory in terms of that. I do take Genesis a bit more literally, and I know that may not be a popular view even within Christianity anymore. I'm honestly not sure. I know Answers in Genesis is still a legitimate organization, and I encourage any of you actually to look into them, because they do present some fantastic arguments against the premises of evolution. But anyway, so returning to the text here. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll continue. Okay. God created great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind, and God saw that this was good. Okay, so now you could imply here that reptiles were brought forth along with fish, sea monsters, and birds in the category of creatures of every kind that creep. Because if I'm not mistaken, reptiles would fall into the category of creeping things. Of course, more obviously, this would be referring to insects and whatnot, because even insects, flies and locusts and whatnot, they swarm the same way. So all swarming things come from water, and that's fascinating to me. I don't know that I've ever put a lot of thought into why swarming things come from water, but I guess you could almost say that it seems obvious to observe them, because their movement itself, be it in water or air, their movement is fluid when they're moving in these great flocks, or swarms or what have you. It almost seems to take on the nature of fluidity when they are in movement, when they're migrating. So it's just fascinating that we see that, and I haven't put a whole lot of thought into it, and this is kind of the first time that I've ever really stopped to think about why that is. But I guess we can conclude here that it is inherent in their nature, because it's what they were. It's what they were drawn out from. It's what they were brought forth from. But I will call it here, because there are really only 10 more verses from here, and this is a good place to stop. We're about half an hour in, and I don't intend for these studies to be long. But please join us again for next time, and I hope this has been enlightening. I hope I've given you something to think about, and hope you've enjoyed pondering with me in the scriptures. And again, I will probably put a link in this video, or even on my TikTok, actually, in my link tree for my TikTok. I will probably put a link to Sepharia in there. It's absolutely fascinating, some of the stuff that you will read. And so, yeah. All that being said, join us next time, where we will probably finish out chapter 1 and go from there. Shalom.